Welcome, Age of Vintage Society. Joel McCrea had a long career, with many different phases. He did it all, although he is primarily associated with westerns. It is what you might call a classy career. Steady, successful, no scandals, and he seemingly had a very practical and healthy relationship to acting, to being a star. Why was Joel McCrea the most believable of western heroes? Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Joel McCrea, a real-life cowboy who became one of the best of Hollywood's make-believe saddle heroes. He was a dependable, even-tempered leading man who casually acknowledged that some important western roles he was offered had been rejected by Gary Cooper, and that some major light comedy parts had been turned down by Cary Grant. Characteristically, he regarded the two actors not as opponents but as friends, modestly remarking, "I turned down as many roles that I thought were beyond my abilities as I did ones I thought weren't good enough." The actor was a fervid outdoorsman who believed deeply in the work ethic, virtually never smoked or drank, and invariably listed his occupation as rancher and his hobby as acting. He began buying farmland with his first movie paychecks and became one of Hollywood's wealthiest ranchers, with large working spreads in Camarillo, northwest of Los Angeles, and in Shandon, farther north. He was known as a frugal millionaire. McCrea's accelerating income permitted him to choose his later roles with care. In World War II he refused to portray military heroes, with the explanation, "Since I was too old to be called, I was too old for that kind of a show." In 1945 he refused to appear in a sexy, highly publicised melodrama with Lana Turner. The postman always rings twice, saying, "This character is too much of a gigolo. I don't like his moral standards." In a 1985 interview he said he had always wanted to be the guy who rode off into the sunset, to represent right over evil. He was one of Hollywood's busiest and most versatile actors, but whose withdrawal from the limelight and relatively scandal-free existence led to a certain lack of enduring notoriety, except among devout classic film fans. With a career spanning 5 decades, McCrea goes down in history as one of the most accomplished Western genre actors. He deliberately chose relatable roles, playing fair, humble, and reserved characters, who honoured traditional values and had a strong moral compass, much like his real-life persona. Cowboy or actor, Joel McCrea was pretty much the same either way. "I always felt so much more comfortable in the Western. The minute I got on a horse and a hat and a pair of boots on, I felt easier. I didn't feel like I was an actor anymore. I felt like I was the guy out there doing it." Tall, handsome and laconic, like his contemporary Cooper, he epitomised the all-American male. The characters he played reflected traditional values of self-reliance, decency and fair play. They were authentic, grounded types, graced with humility and an understated charm. And this is just how McCrea wanted it. What few knew about him was that behind his folksy exterior lay an impressive shrewdness. He consciously wanted to cultivate a certain image, and would not stray from it. His goal was to play characters he could relate to, mostly in uplifting films. He was deliberate and strategic in his choices, and over a 5-decade career it served him well. In the fall of 1905, Joel McCrea entered this world destined for Hollywood. The son of a power company executive, he enjoyed an upper-middle-class childhood in what would soon be a cornerstone of the motion picture business. Growing up in South Pasadena, California, McCrea watched the magic of movies come alive in his childhood backyard. Enamoured by the bright lights and the excitement of showbiz, it wasn't long until he set his sights on acting. As a teen, he delivered newspapers to neighbours of such calibre as director Cecil B. DeMille, who was already becoming a giant in the industry. His first job earned him $5 for riding a horse in a mob scene. Not only that, but he got to watch D.W. Griffith direct the jaw-dropping silent film Intolerance, which was partly filmed nearby. McCrea grew to be 6'3" and was physically fit. While he was a student at the Hollywood High School, he worked in movies as an extra and a stunt double, hobnobbing with cowboy movie heroes William S. Hart and Tom Mix. Blessed with lean, clean, fresh-scrubbed good looks, he began acting at the Pasadena Playhouse while still enrolled at Pomona College, and continued to do so until his graduation in 1928. Finally, in 1929, MGM cast him in The Jazz Age, starring Douglas Fairbanks Jr., for his first significant role, shortly after the studio signed him. After one more picture there, he moved over to RKO, where his career started to take off. He established himself as a handsome leading man who was considered versatile enough to star in both dramas and comedies. His most memorable effort from those early years was The Most Dangerous Game, about a remote island where humans are hunted for sport. The film was made by the same team that within months produced the first King Kong. Right around this time, Joel set his sights on a beautiful young actress named Frances D., who was making the rounds in Hollywood. Reportedly, sometime in 1931, his car had pulled up to hers at a red light, and McCrea had looked over and doffed his hat to her. The very proper Frances considered this forward, as they'd not been formally introduced. Turning up her nose, she stepped on the gas when the light turned green, leaving the young actor in the dust, literally and figuratively. If this amusing incident is true, it hardly deterred him. In 1933, Joel was slated to star opposite Irene Dunne in John Cromwell's The Silver Cord, and lobbied hard for Frances to get a featured role. She did, and once the film wrapped, a whirlwind romance ensued. The couple wed in October of that year. They would quickly have 2 sons, Jody and Peter, and then separate briefly in 1935. Once reconciled, they managed to stay together for 57 years, adding one more son, David, to their brood in 1955. They also made several more pictures together, notably Frank Lloyd's Wells Fargo and Alfred E. Green's Four Faces West, both westerns. McCrea wisely encouraged Frances to keep acting, reasoning that if he asked her to quit, she might resent him for it later. Fortunately, he was able to avoid being typecast and crossed over into different genres, from playful comedy, 1937's Sullivan's Travels, and action-packed westerns, 1937's Wells Fargo, to suspenseful crime dramas, 1937's Dead End, and satisfying thrillers, Alfred Hitchcock's 1940s Foreign Correspondent. He's done it all. But ultimately McCrea decided to stick with the genre that his heart was in, westerns. I liked doing comedies, but as I got older I was better suited to do westerns, because I think it becomes unattractive for an older fellow trying to look young, falling in love with attractive girls in those kinds of situations. By 1946, an older, more distinguished version of McCrea made a bold decision that would alter the rest of his career. Incredibly self-aware, McCrea knew that his days in romantic dramas and comedies were behind him, and better left for the younger faces hitting Hollywood. He leaned into this new chapter of his life, but steered it in a direction that truly felt like home. Excluding 1953's thriller Shoot First and 1951's Hollywood Story, where he played himself, McCrea starred in strictly westerns. Performing in westerns was a return to what he had done earlier in his career, and McCrea enjoyed the genre. Quickly he became a household name in the genre, starring in timeless classics like 1953's The Lone Hand, 1957's Trooper Hook, and 1962's Ride the High Country. On and off the screen, McCrea lived by the cowboy code. However, as much as Joel enjoyed his successful acting career, his true passion was working his cattle ranch at the foot of the Norwegian Grade, where the Santa Rosa and Conejo valleys meet. The ranch would be the couple's home throughout their 57-year marriage. The love of the land was in his blood. He got into the show business to make enough money to buy a ranch and ended up loving both. He knew early on that he wanted to be a rancher. Joel once wrote, "When I was a boy growing up in Hollywood, my dreams were not of acting or the motion picture business, but of big open country, of ranches, of streams and meadows and fields of new-mown hay, and I looked forward to the day when I could buy land of my own." Joel was a bit of a novice when he first started working his ranch, but he was eager to learn. Wyatt McCrea, Joel's eldest grandchild, recalled, "My grandfather became friends with many of the long-time ranchers and farmers in the area and would occasionally seek out their advice on cattle or crops. Among those was the very prominent Adolfo Camarillo. My grandfather would many times stop and visit with Mr. Camarillo about the weather, cattle prices, or which crops may be bringing the best yields. Mr. Camarillo was always willing to share thoughts from his many years of experience. My grandfather would also frequently help the neighbouring ranches work cattle, as was the custom in those days for neighbours to help neighbours, and he learned much from watching how different ranches would do things. He became well respected among the locals for his willingness to learn and do things the right way." Through the years, Joel was able to acquire more land, doubling the size of the ranch to nearly 2,400 acres. He ran an average of 150 head of mother cows. He grew barley, wheat and oats. Despite his busy movie career, Joel was able to do much of the work on the land himself, with the help of his foreman and the McCrea sons. A local newspaper reporter observed, "On his ranch, Joel McCrea raises beef, barley and boys." As was the practice among farmers and ranchers in the area, Joel did dry land farming, relying on Mother Nature to irrigate his fields. The horsemanship Joel learned as a youth served him well when, routinely, he rode on horseback for miles around his ranch to check on the cattle's water troughs and the fences. And in his early days of ranching, all his farm equipment was horse-drawn. By the 1940s, Joel was using tractors. Today, his 1947 John Deere tractor and some of the original horse-drawn equipment are on display at the ranch. What Joel did was make more than 90 movies over the course of a 50-year career. He always joked that he only acted so he could afford to ranch, Wyatt said. That was what he really loved to do. That was what he always listed as his occupation on his tax returns. Of course, he was so famous that everyone knew what he did, and one year the IRS came to check on him. He held out his hands and said, "I didn't get these calluses on the movie set." They never bothered him again. McCrea's last public appearance was October 1st when he attended a Beverly Hills fundraising dinner for Republican Senator Peter Wilson, who is campaigning for governor. Paramount Pictures executive producer A.C. Lyles, a friend of McCrea's for many years, said First Lady Barbara Bush went over to McCrea after her speech, put her hand in his hand and said, "My hero." He lit up, Lyles said. That summed up everybody's feeling about Joel. Of the great American male film stars, Joel McCrea is arguably the most underrated. Tall and taciturn, good-looking and good-humoured, McCrea may have ranked just behind John Wayne as the most believable of Western heroes. Although best remembered for his cowboy roles, he was a versatile actor who handled frivolous light comedy and adventurous melodrama with the same skill he brought to westerns. McCrea, Hollywood's good-humoured, dependable star of the 1930s, 1940s and 1950s, died of pulmonary complications. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of Joel McCrea? Likeable, ruggedly handsome figure, a durable star who first made his name in adventures and melodramas of the 1930s.